The day they called me a fool still echoes in the kitchen, and the sound of that word is the only thing that ever made me pack my bags. I can still see my mother's eyes narrowing as my father slammed his palm on the worn wooden table, the plates rattling like a warning bell. "You think you can turn this barren hill into a forest?" he snarled, his voice cracking like old paint. "You're a disgrace, Liam. You'll bring shame on this family forever." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke. The unspoken verdict hung in the air. I was dreaming against the grain of generations that had survived by tilling the soil, not by planting hopes. I felt the bitter sting of their ridicule, not as a fleeting insult, but as a chain fastening around my chest. In that moment, the hill, scarred, empty, a scar on my family's legacy, became both my prison and my promise. I left that night with nothing but a tattered notebook of seed ideas and the fury of being labeled an embarrassment. The road out of town felt like a blade cutting through the roots of my childhood, and every mile away was a silent protest against the voices that had tried to drown my aspirations. I drove until the map faded into a blur, arriving in a small university town where the word ecology hung in lecture halls like a promise. I buried myself in textbooks, fieldwork, and evenings spent knee-deep in mud, coaxing seedlings from the very soil that had been mocked as useless. My classmates laughed when I talked about turning a 20-acre derelict plot into a thriving ecosystem. They called my plans naive fantasies. But each ridicule was a spark. I set a rhythm: sunrise, soil testing, planting, night-long research. I learned that a single resilient oak could survive where nothing else could, that mycorrhizal networks were the hidden highways of the forest, and that patience was the most brutal, yet most rewarding teacher. 3 years later, I stood on the same hill, now a canvas of battered earth, and planted the first sapling. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of a promise kept. The first year was brutal. Droughts cracked the ground, pests gnawed at the tender leaves, and the wind howled as if to mock me again. I lost more trees than I could count, and each loss whispered the same old doubt: "You're a fool." Instead of giving up, I adjusted. I built rain catchments, introduced nitrogen-fixing legumes, and invited local wildlife back with birdhouses and bee hotels. The land responded, slowly at first, green shoots breaking through the brown crust, the scent of earth after rain, the chorus of crickets at dusk. By the 5th year, the hill was no longer a scar. It was a rising blanket of green, a living proof that perseverance could rewrite a landscape's destiny. Awards followed: a regional restoration grant, a feature in a national environmental journal, and finally, a partnership with a multinational corporation seeking to offset its carbon footprint. They wanted me to replicate my success on a larger scale, and I agreed, knowing that the real victory would be returning home, not to prove myself, but to show what belief, even when unheld, could grow into. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a glossy envelope addressed to Liam O'Connor, founder, Verdant Horizons. Inside, a single line: "We are honored to host you at the O'Connor family estate for the unveiling of the new community forest." My heart pounded as the familiar silhouette of the old farm came into view, the same porch where I'd once been shamed. My mother stood by the kitchen window, her hair now silver, eyes widened not with surprise but with a guarded curiosity. My father, shoulders stooped with age, squinted as if trying to read a story he'd long stopped listening to. My younger sister, who had always been my silent ally, smiled, a flicker of pride I hadn't seen in years. The ceremony was simple: a podium beneath a newly planted grove, the air scented with pine and earth. I stepped forward, feeling the ground beneath my boots steady and solid, a stark contrast to the shaky floorboards of my childhood kitchen. "Thank you," I began, voice steady, "for allowing me to share the fruits of a dream once called foolish." I gestured to the horizon where a line of saplings stood, their trunks barely a finger's width, yet promising a forest that would one day eclipse this very hill. My father's face hardened, his eyes searching for the boy who had left. "You think this is enough?" he asked, voice cracking like dry twigs. I smiled, not in triumph but in understanding. It's not about proving anything to anyone, Dad. It's about honoring the land that gave us life, even when we thought it was useless. It's about showing that a single seed, nurtured with patience, can become a shelter for generations. Around us, the wind rustled through the leaves, a soft applause that the world itself seemed to offer. My sister squeezed my hand, and I felt the old wounds begin to knit. Then, a sudden gust lifted a portable screen, revealing a live feed from a satellite map. The camera panned across the region, highlighting a patchwork of green that matched the outline of the hill we stood upon. The feed zoomed out, showing thousands of acres blooming where once only dust lay. The data overlay displayed carbon sequestration numbers, biodiversity indexes, and the economic boost to nearby towns. A stunned silence fell over the gathering. My mother's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow but of awe. My father's mouth opened, words caught in his throat, and finally, a simple, trembling "I was wrong." The moment lodged itself into my memory like a stone set in a riverbed, unmovable, undeniable. It wasn't just their acknowledgement. It was the universe aligning to validate the years of soil-soaked nights. The doubts turned into seedlings, the laughter turned into leaves. After the ceremony, as the sun dipped behind the newly crowned canopy, we walked the row of saplings together. My father placed a weathered hand on a young oak's bark, the same bark that would one day shelter his grandchildren. "What you did, you gave us back what we thought we'd lost," he whispered. I looked around at the faces of my family, at the soil turning dark with fresh life, and felt a quiet joy settle deep within. The resentment that had once fueled my departure had transmuted into gratitude, not just for the success, but for the lessons learned while walking alone. My story, I realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption, of a piece of earth, of a family's belief, and of my own resolve. The hill that once symbolized disgrace had become a living ledger of karma, each leaf a handwritten note saying, "You believed in me when none did." As we stood there, a robin fluttered down, perched on a branch and sang. The melody wrapped around us, a reminder that life, even after the harshest storms, finds a way to sing again. I turned to the camera crew, nodded, and whispered, "If you ever hear voices telling you your dream is ridiculous, remember this hill. Plant your seed, tend it with patience, and let the world watch you grow." The final shot captured the forest's canopy bathed in golden light, a living testament that ridicule can be the very soil from which greatness springs. And in that light, my family's faces glowed, not with shame, but with the quiet pride of those who finally understood that the most profound victories are not just personal. They are shared, rooted, and forever blossoming. Walking back to the house, my sister laughed. "You know, Mom's going to start a garden now." I squeezed her shoulder, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a gentle, lingering warmth. The hill had healed, and so had the heart that once called me a fool. The lesson was simple, yet profound. When you nurture a dream with unwavering belief, even the most barren land can become a cathedral of hope.